Roaring 20s New Deal. Part 2. And this time, it's personal. Let's take another crack at it. First time taking this test didn't go so well. Second time will go well, as long as you pay attention to this video. Now you got your remediation sheet. It's got all those blanks in it. We're going to go through each and every one. And when you see red text, when you see words in red, those are the words you're going to fill into the blank. Follow along as I go through this, and we will go through the entire topic. You're going to take that sheet, study that sheet, do note cards from that sheet, study those note cards, take this test again, and you are going to rock this test, part 2. Now we're talking about three things. We're talking about how the economy exploded, the Roaring 20s, and then how it all fell apart, Great Depression, and then how a president tried to fix all that New Deal. Let's start with part 1. Let's start with the Roaring 20s. So you got your sheet out. First topic, Roaring 20s. First question is number 1. So you see number 1. Let's go, let's roll, let's roll, let's go! Popular culture developed during the 1920s. One major invention was radio. So life is getting good in the 1920s with new technology. Folks sit around and experience mass media for the first time in the form of radio. We've got radio. You can listen to tunes on radio, and one form of music you can listen to is jazz. Radio broadcasted jazz music, and later President Franklin D. Roosevelt's fireside chats. But that's during the New Deal. For now, just think jazz radio, jazz radio. Hey, we're still on number 1. You see, even though we switched slides, we're still on number 1. Last part of number 1. Movies allowed people to escape Depression-era realities. So when the economy falls apart and when people start losing their jobs, they still want to go to movies because it acts as a distraction from how miserable their lives can be. Newspapers and magazines, last bit of mass media, shaped cultural norms and sparked fads. Language exploded in the 1920s. Slang language like, that's a bunch of baloney, or put your cheaters on. These are all 1920s fad language that took off thanks to newspapers and magazines spreading cultural norms. Alright, what about cars? People got cars. Where do they get those cars from? From a guy named Henry Ford. During the Roaring 20s, the automobile became more affordable thanks to Henry Ford's use of the, and on my face is blocking this, the assembly line. A-S-S-E-M-B-L-Y line. The assembly line allowed Ford to produce cars, and the car he made was called the Model T, most popularly. And they were made very quickly and efficiently using the assembly line, and in that way they were more affordable. Get it? Henry Ford's cars were more affordable. Now, everybody thinks the 1920s was just this fun time where everybody was dancing and hugging and living like the Great Gatsby. Not really. There were issues in the 1920s. The Roaring 20s challenged traditional values as well. Religion, traditional fundamentalist Christian religion, was challenged with the teachings of Darwin's theory of evolution in schools. This resulted in the, write this in, the S-C-O-P-E-S trial. A guy named John Scopes is in Tennessee, and he taught evolution. He was arrested for it, and he was fined. And it just shows that we're having issues between two groups of society in the 1920s. In this case, people who are in support of Darwin's theory of evolution and people who are in support of a more traditional fundamentalist religious outlook. Flappers, new role for women. Write this in. Flappers challenged the traditional role of women. They cut their hair short. They went out to bars. They smoked cigarettes. They wore different dresses and a lot more makeup. Challenging the idea of what a woman should look like and what a woman should do. Now, it is these flappers who loved the amendment which gave them the right to vote. Women exercised the right to vote earned by the 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment grants women the right to vote. Let's go one amendment before that. Let's go with the 18th Amendment. The 18th Amendment began the era of prohibition of alcohol, which means you were not allowed to drink. The only problem is almost everybody was still drinking. And they were drinking in speakeasies. The smuggling of alcohol was sold in what were called speakeasies bars where you could buy alcohol even though it was against the law to be drinking alcohol. Alright, last thing on the Roaring 20s, I said there's a cultural clash. A lot of that cultural clash has to do with immigrants. The rise in new immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe was met with fierce nativism. Now remember, old immigration is coming from Great Britain, Norway, Ireland, Sweden. Now that's changed. You've got immigrants coming from Greece. You've got immigrants coming from Italy, the Southern and Eastern European locations. And what did that lead to the rise to? The rise to the new Ku Klux Klan. The last part is K-L-A-N. Now before, the Ku Klux Klan was pretty much all just against African Americans. Now it's against African Americans and immigrants as well. So we see a change with the Ku Klux Klan. Alright, we got Roaring 20s done. Let's talk about the stock market crash. So the stock market is a measure of how stocks are being sold up in New York City, and it's a good measure of how the economy is doing. If it crashes, that's really bad. It did crash in 1929. How did that happen? Well, during the 1920s, there was an excessive expansion of credit. People were buying goods not on their own money, but with borrowed money, and there was too much borrowed money that was being thrown around. One thing that people were buying were stocks. While business was booming, Americans made investments with borrowed money. This is called over-speculation. My face is blocking the speculation part. Over-speculation means you think a stock is going to go up. So you don't use your own money, you use borrowed money. And once it goes up, you'll pay back the borrowed money. But what if it goes down? Then you just lost your money on the stock, but you never even had that money in the first place. So you have no money to pay back your debts. That is why overexpansion of credit can be a huge problem. Now, here's a big problem. Business failures led to bankruptcies. That's an obvious one. And U.S. banks were investing deposits into the stock market. So if someone, old Betty Sue, put 20 bucks into the stock market or into the bank took that and invested it into the stock market. Well, when the stock market crashed, the banks are all out of money, and poor Betty Sue has no way of getting her $20 back, or her $1,000, or $10,000. That money is gone. The banks ran out of, write this word in, money. The banks ran out of money. Now, imagine this. Imagine that you were good. You didn't invest. You didn't over-speculate. You didn't use credit. You just put your money in the bank. And you hear that the banks are running out of money. Well, you would run right to the bank and demand to get your money back. Clients panic, attempted to withdraw their money, but there was nothing left for them to give because the banks had ruined their money by putting it into the stock market. So banks go away, and that means there are no investments in the U.S. economy. No new investments in the U.S. economy. Credit. A lot of this had to do with credit. Number 10. Remember, people were buying goods on credit. So when they completely ran out of money and they were supposed to pay back, they couldn't. It means companies were receiving less money in return for goods. We got bad economic times. Now, the stock market crash, it happens like that. Like, a couple weeks, couple months. But then this will spiral out of control and get to be an even bigger problem in the form of the Great Depression. Alright, so real quick, let's talk about causes of the Great Depression. How did it start? Well, one would be the stock market crash we just talked about. The other thing was the collapse of the banks. This is all related. Remember, the banks were investing money in the stock market, and when the stock market crashed, the bank's money goes away. So if the banks are gone, they can't invest and start new businesses, and that's a huge issue. Now, there was an organization that was in charge of taking care of the banks, of looking after the banks, of setting interest rates, and that was the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve could have saved the banks. They didn't. Write this in for number 12. The Federal Reserve failed to prevent the widespread collapse of the nation's banking system in the 1920s and 1930s. They let the banks fail. When the banks go away, that led to a severe contraction, meaning make smaller, in the supply of money in the nation. So you don't have as much money floating around in the economy, which means you can't start new business, which means that the Great Depression just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Hey, let's go to 13. All right, check this out. Let's say you grow something in Iowa. You grow corn in Iowa. Let's just say that. And you use the corn to make other products too, and you want to sell those products. But remember, somebody in France is growing stuff and selling stuff too. Well, the U.S. says, let's help our economy by let's tax France. Let's tax every other country, put a tariff on their goods. Well, those other countries responded by putting a tariff on U.S. goods. So now that farmer can't sell his stuff anymore, which means exports go down, which means world trade went down. This was called the Tariff Act of 1930. High protective tariffs produced retaliatory tariffs. That's when Europe and the rest of the world responds with a tariff, which strangled world trade. This was also called the Hawley-Smoot, S-M-O-O-T, tariff. The Hawley-Smoot tariff, which led to a decrease in exports. Exports went down because of the Hawley-Smoot tariff. All right. Now, let's talk about what this policy was. What are all these policies that are happening, like putting tax? One policy is called fiscal policy. Anytime you raise or lower tariffs, that's an example of fiscal policy. So the Hawley-Smoot tariff was fiscal policy. Who controls fiscal policy? It's controlled by the president. Write that in, controlled by the president, and it's controlled by Congress. So Congress and the president get together. And what are they talking about? They're talking about levels of government, write this word in, taxation, levels of government taxation, and government spending. All that put together is fiscal policy. So the Hawley-Smoot tariff is fiscal policy. There's another type of policy we have to talk about, and that is monetary policy. Monetary policy is controlled by the Federal Reserve. Ooh! Do you remember how the Federal Reserve did not bail out the banks? That was an example of bad monetary policy. Monetary policy controls the supply of money, write that in, money, and credit to expand or contract the economy. Now, how do you remember the Federal Reserve controls monetary policy? Remember, the Federal Reserve is in charge of the banks. What do you find at a bank? You find money. Money is the root word for monetary policy. So banks, Federal Reserve, monetary policy, supply of money, and credit to expand or contract the economy. All right, beautiful. Let's go to 16. Let's talk about some bad stuff from Great Depression. The Great Depression led to unemployment and homelessness. People were out of jobs. 1 in 4 Americans were out of jobs. The collapse of the banking system and the decline in demand for goods in the U.S. economy. So that's what makes things worse and worse and worse. Now, at the same time, unions are getting upset because the economy is so poor. The Great Depression led to political unrest, as seen by the growing militancy of labor unions, as well as farm foreclosures and migrations. Unions were getting more aggressive with their strikes. They were having sit-in strikes where they would sit on top of the machinery so it couldn't be used. Upset about the terrible economic conditions and protesting. Militancy, meaning like military, like more aggressive. So stuff is terrible in the United States of America. How can it possibly get better? Well, a president is going to try to make it better. And that president is Franklin D. Roosevelt, and his plan was called the New Deal. Now, the New Deal is going to change the role of government permanently. The government is going to be more of an active participant in solving problems. If laissez-faire, meaning government hands off, stay off, had been in place in the 1880s, now in the 1920s, an active participant, a bigger government, is in place because of the New Deal. Now, president was FDR. Write that in. President Franklin Roosevelt rallied a nation in which 1 in 4 people were unemployed. No one was putting their money in banks because the banks had made bad decisions and ran out of money. But you need people to put their money in the bank so the banks can loan money out and start new investments. So what does FDR say?
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Variation of that is we have nothing to fear, write in fear, but fear, write in fear again, itself. Franklin Roosevelt, people would sit by the fire and listen to his fireside chats, in which he would speak directly to the American people, explaining his plan, explaining how the New Deal is going to work. Now, he comes up with all these New Deal programs. One program was the Works Progress Administration. It was a relief measure. Folks are building roads, building dams, building walls, building stuff, working, and then receiving payment. Because the Works Progress Administration provided direct payment to people for immediate help. Direct payment. Now, the way to think about this is the W, work, and then the PA is for pay. You work and you get paid directly. That's number 20. Let's go to number 21. Write this one out. The Agricultural Adjustment Administration was a recovery program designed to bring the nation out of the Depression over time. What happened was farmers were growing too much stuff, too many crops, so their supply was too high. Supply was high, demand was low, prices were low. So the AAA said, burn your crops, grow less stuff, and then that stuff will be more expensive, and that will help you get out of the Depression over time. Here's another program, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC. You see this all the time when you go to the bank. See the sign right here, FDIC? This is to make sure the banks don't make the same mistakes that they made during the Great Depression or during the stock market crash. It corrected unsound banking and investment practices, ensuring money, today it's up to $250,000, that no matter what, your money will get paid back if a bank makes a mistake. So that increases confidence in the banking system, reducing fear. We have nothing to fear but fear itself. Hey, last program, Social Security Act was passed to offer safeguards for workers. So the Social Security Act takes money out of your paycheck every time you get one, and so that you'll have a retirement benefit by the time you retire, you'll be safe from running out of money. Safeguards for workers. So there's some big time New Deal programs. Last one, 24. What was the overall legacy of the New Deal? Legacy of the New Deal is doing three things. It influenced the public's belief in government to deliver public services, to intervene in the economy, and to promote the general welfare. What it's doing is making the government more big, more powerful, to intervene and influence big problems, which is what the New Deal did. Study this sheet, do those note cards, work hard, be ready for round 2, because it's coming soon.